on me gone, okay, I get it.
What did people think of Down syndrome? What the fuck? Do all Down syndrome people think the same? No. This one. I saw this video on Twitter. And it got my interest, so I was like, fuck it, let's react to this shit. I don't know if documentary videos are good for YouTube. But I really like documentary videos, it's pretty interesting as shit.
In today's video, we will look at the history of people with Down syndrome, from how they were treated, to how eugenics sought to eliminate people with this condition. It should be noted that some of the language used in this video will no longer be acceptable, but it's important in understanding its history and how language and values have changed over time. Down syndrome, otherwise known as trisomy 21, is, simply put, the presence of a full or partial additional chromosome. Typically, a human will have 23 chromosome pairs, vital components of a cell to hold our DNA. In individuals with Down syndrome, the chromosome pair number 21 will have an extra chromosome, either a full or a fragment of one. This additional chromosome alters the blueprint in the development of the embryo, with too high a dose of certain genes leading to congenital conditions. The extra copy of chromosome 21 occurs due to the failure of the chromosomes to separate fully during the production of the sex cells.
Bro, I'm not gonna lie, bro. Why do all people with Down syndrome look the same? Even then, like, no offense, even dwarves, they look the same. Like, they all have the same, not body builds, but they all have the same, like, face build, bro. Why is that, bro? Why? Do they all come from, like, one great like, a Down syndrome king? Just, like, his DNA just went everywhere, so that's why all the people with Down syndrome just look like the Down syndrome king. Like, if there's like a dwarf king, then like all the dwarves on this earth look like the dwarf king that like lived in like the 1400s or some shit.
There is no direct cause for the cell splitting in this manner, though it has been noted that mothers over the age of 35 have a higher chance of having a child with Down syndrome. Down syndrome will result in several different clinical conditions, as it affects many parts of a person's systems. People with Down syndrome will often display intellectual and developmental disabilities, neurological features, congenital heart defects, gastrointestinal abnormalities, and characteristic facial features. And as many as 50% of babies born with Down syndrome are born with heart problems. This is tragically the leading cause of mortality in people with Down syndrome, especially in the first 2 years. As for the history of people with Down syndrome, with it being a genetic condition, they have been part of human history so long as there have been humans. But before the medicalization of the condition, Down syndrome was not recognized as its own disability. People with Down syndrome were often grouped together with people with other intellectual disabilities under the umbrella term of idiots from birth. Evidence from 5th and 6th century burial sites in France indicate that people with Down syndrome were buried with other members of the community. This could indicate that they were not stigmatized and were treated just like any other member of the community. Although people with intellectual disabilities like Down syndrome could not own land, nor could they inherit, so too are there examples of people with Down syndrome being abandoned and neglected, with families unwilling or unable to care for their complex needs. As people with Down syndrome often have many health problems, most died at a young age without their proper medical care. People who appear to have Down syndrome appear in a number of paintings or in sculptures throughout history, though much of this is modern day.
Bro, I know they was working his little ass off. I just know they was working his ass off, bro. Fuck. Child labor was fucking different back then, bro.
Interpretation of the facial features of
they was putting his ass to work.
Those
bro.
with the condition were often confined to the role of the eternal child or the holy innocent, and so in such paintings they were often depicted as angels or alongside Jesus Christ. Before the development of state-run institutions, responsibility for the care of disabled people fell on the family. However, there are examples of religious hospitals that cared for people with intellectual disabilities. Down syndrome was first described in 1866 by Dr. John Langdon Down, and of course it is from him where the syndrome gets its name. Down was a British doctor, and he worked in what was then called the Royal Earlswood Asylum for Idiots.
The hell?
This was a charitable asylum, with patients admitted through recommendation. At a time when many people with intellectual disabilities or mental illness were simply locked away for indefinite periods of time, this asylum had different goals. It catered for children of school age, whose families otherwise would not be able to afford institutional care. The goal was to teach the patients useful life skills and to prepare them for integration into the community. Whilst working as the superintendent for the Earlswood Asylum, Down began to categorize groups of his patients. He grouped the patients based on those with similar facial features.
Being like that type of doctor back then must have been fucking scary, bruh. Like, imagine the first person to discover AIDS, bro. That shit must have been fucking horrifying.
And intellectual disabilities. But this categorization was done through the lens of racialized pseudoscience. Down wrote his paper, Observations on an Ethnic Classification of Idiots, in which he put forward the theory that it was possible to classify different conditions by ethnic characteristics. Down classified people we would now consider with Down syndrome as the Mongolian idiot, or as Mongoloids, as he believed that they looked Mongolian. His classification of people with intellectual disabilities
I'm gonna start calling people Mongoloid, bro. Mongoloid.
Along racial lines was never accepted, and Down himself would later abandon his own beliefs. After leaving his position at Earlswood, Down set up his own private home for people with Down syndrome, called Normansfield. It was here where Down ran a facility with the highest standards of comfort and hygiene. The patients at Normansfield received an education as well as being able to enjoy leisure activities like horse riding, arts and crafts, and gardening. Down passed away in 1896, aged 67. His grandson, Norman, born a decade later, was diagnosed with Down syndrome. Down's work in identifying the characteristics of people with Down syndrome caught on by the turn of the 20th century. By this point, Down syndrome was referred to as Mongolian idiocy, or Mongolism. Even before the causes of Down syndrome were understood, there were attempts to eliminate the condition through eugenic means. Eugenics is the scientific theory that humans can be improved through selective breeding of populations. In the early 1900s, eugenics was not a fringe idea. It was not only taught at leading universities, but eugenic principles became enshrined into law. Indiana was the first American state to introduce the sterilization of people with Down syndrome, with eugenics being the justification. Plenty other states followed suit, with 33 of the 48 American states passing such laws.
I'm not listening to anything right now, bro. Like, I'm listening, but I don't even understand it.
People with Down syndrome were included as acceptable targets of this practice.
If I'm not turning on the captions, then I can't hear it, bro. I don't know why.
Eugenics took hold, some began to link Down syndrome and other intellectual disabilities with immorality as well as genetics. It was seen as not just a genetic defect, but as a moral contagion that could harm society as a whole. In 1927, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Buck v. Bell that the state could forcibly sterilize people with intellectual disabilities. As many as 60,000 people, with many of them being people with Down syndrome, were sterilized during the push for eugenics in the United States.
Sterilized?
But these laws...
Sterilized meaning? Damn.
...would go on to inspire some of the worst examples of eugenics. The Nazi Party in Germany carried out the mass execution of tens of thousands of disabled people in a bid to improve the genetic stock. People with Down syndrome were framed as a drain on resources and a cost that the state could not bear. Under the Law for the Prevention of Hereditary Disease Offspring, thousands were sterilized. But in 1939, Hitler authorized the Action T4. T4 was a secret program to murder those deemed life unworthy to live, and was euphemistically called involuntary euthanasia. Children and adults with Down syndrome were among the first victims. Doctors selected children for death under the guise of medical care, and moved them to specialized killing centers. Upon arrival, patients would be examined so that any pre-existing condition could be used as a false cause of death. Parents were told that their children had died of natural causes. Their bodies were then cremated and sent back to their parents. However, it would later be discovered that the ashes of those murdered were all mixed together, so when parents received the ashes, they received a mix of multiple victims.
No.
Under Action T4, people with Down syndrome were gassed, poisoned, or starved to death. This horrendous program of mass slaughter would prove to be the
They
blueprint for
happy
the
as
horrors
shit
of the
too, but
Nazi
they
death
don't like.
camps.
Look at him, bro. Right here, he's smiling, bro. He doesn't know what's about to happen to him, bro.
Thankfully, after the Second World War, eugenics as an ideology fell out of favour. But for many people with Down syndrome, the legacy of eugenics still caused much harm. Many people with Down syndrome were confined in institutions that were overcrowded,
they deserve to
underfunded,
live, bro,
and filled
honestly.
with abuse. One example is the Willowbrook State School in New York. The school was home to many children and young adults with Down syndrome, who were left to their own devices and without much in the way of any care. Often patients at this school were left covered in their own feces, naked and unattended to. It was only in the mid-20th century that techniques were discovered that allowed scientists to identify the shape and number of chromosomes in a cell. This led to the identification of the third chromosome and the adaptation of the term trisomy 21 to describe the condition.
21.
It wouldn't be until 1961 that an effort was made to remove the dehumanizing language of mongoloid, thanks in part to a better understanding of the causes of Down syndrome. The term mongoloid was seen as misleading and offensive, with the term becoming pejorative. Leading scientists wrote a letter calling for the adoption of an alternative term for the condition, with Down syndrome being the one that stuck.
Wait. Can I see? What is this? I'm not gonna use that word then.
In the 1980s and 90s, there was a change in the approach to the institutionalization of people with Down syndrome. Families refused to give up their children, and community care became the focus. A number of discriminatory practices were outlawed, such as charging people with Down syndrome more for airplane tickets. Rights were cemented, such as having the condition be a protected characteristic to combat housing discrimination. As medical care improved,
I just want to see what a underweight Down syndrome. I never seen. Let me see. Oh, they got like skinny people with Down syndrome too. Interesting. Tallest person with Down syndrome. Who's the tallest person with Down syndrome? Bro, what the fuck? Damn. Igor. 7'8". Tall as hell.
Conditions such as congenital heart defects no longer prove to be a death sentence. Life expectancy for people with Down syndrome also increased. In the 1940s, life expectancy was just around 10 years old, whereas
like
now it's around...
Life would be so hard back then, bro. If you were sent to the 1800s with your knowledge right now, would you be able to survive, bro? I don't know. What would I do? It depends, because if I got sent to like Vietnam or Japan, I feel like I'd do good. Because I know I'm pretty like... I feel like I'll blend in very good with that shit. But if I get sent to like Egypt or fucking England, bro, I'll get stoned to death, bro. Like they'd be on some bullshit over there. Or Russia, even. But I feel like there was people living on Antarctica. I mean, in the Arctic back then, bro.
60 years old. All the while, people with Down syndrome became more visible. From actors with the condition starring in hit shows like Glee or Line of Duty, to the Special Olympics gaining popularity, stereotypes
Why is
continue to
Special
be
Olympics
challenged.
even a fucking
Down
thing?
syndrome advocacy groups seek to educate, provide support, and campaign for
I
increased
feel like
rights.
a lot of people that
But new challenges and
they just make fun
controversies
of them, bro.
continue to affect people with the condition. With the advent of non-invasive prenatal testing, expecting parents can find out whether or not their baby might have Down syndrome. This has led to pregnancies being terminated where Down syndrome has been confirmed, with countries like Iceland having nearly 100% of pregnancies diagnosed with Down syndrome terminated. Some have termed this a new form of eugenics or even genocide, and some scientists like Richard Dawkins have stated that it would be immoral to bring a child with Down syndrome into the world. There are plenty of passionate examples of advocacy available online, including from people with Down syndrome concerned with such efforts. People with this condition have long been part of human history, though often marginalized or misunderstood.
Good video, bro. Good, informative. You know what I'm saying? I kind of want to look into that gorilla versus 100 men match. I wonder if there's a. I wonder if there's a video for that too. Shout out to the guy on Twitter, Facts. Shout out to bro. He put me on too. The history of inbreeding. But yeah, I'm gonna see y'all though. That was a good video. Subscribe if you have Down syndrome or if you fuck with Down syndrome, or subscribe.